Silent Nights by Roy Perry. Read by Michael Maloney. Alan Wilberforce Ward had learnt about hang gliding when on holiday with his parents at Rhossili at the end of the Gower Peninsula in West Glamorgan, Wales. After a few days, he had become skillful enough to ride the wind and swoop about 100 metres outside the windows of the hotel room, much to the surprise of his parents. Back home, the family considered the lad's future. "What would you most like to do?" asked his mother. "I would love to be a spy in the sky," was the reply. "You've been watching too many James Bond movies," said his father. Alan decided to enlist in the British Army. After some tough square bashing, he was selected for advanced parachute training. He also qualified as a pilot of a single-engined aircraft on a course similar to that for a private pilot's license. He was recruited to an elite Special Forces unit operating against the Taliban in Afghanistan and had perfected a method of silently approaching a target to report the status of the opposition. On his second tour of duty, he was scouting enemy sites in Baghlan province, soaring in a special hang glider above a wild river, when he was suddenly aware of the zing-wee of high-velocity rifle rounds. He desperately tried to maneuver away as the shells passed close by. A round found its target with a zing thud. He had been hit in the right thigh. Still able to maintain height, he did his best to put distance between himself and his attacker. After a few minutes, he realized that he was losing height. Perhaps a round had deflated the wing. Soon he felt long grass and was able to put down on the riverbank. He hurriedly dialed in his coordinates and felt his thigh. It felt serious. Looking back, he could still see Tracer arcing into the sky, probing for him, but moving away. 30 minutes later, the whoop-whoop of helicopter blades was heard, and soon a Wessex machine was hovering over him. A man descended on a line and gathered up Alan with his craft and all the kit before raising it to the wide-open door. They sped off low and fast. His wounds were treated at a camp medical centre, and then in a Kabul hospital. Plastered from hip to toe, he was flown back to the UK. He arrived back at his parents' home in East Cowes just before Christmas. The family went for a meal at the Hare and Hounds, Down End, on December the 22nd. During the meal, amid the happy snap of crackers and cameras, he heard the unmistakable sound of a Salvation Army band and singers. They entered the premises. Alan said to his dad, "There is nothing quite so evocative at Christmas than this sound." He became aware of a very pretty girl who was collecting funds. Boldly, he said, "Why are you not singing?" She croaked back, "Laryngitis." Completely smitten, Alan wrote a quick note asking for a date. To his total surprise, she nodded and wrote a phone number and her name. Alice. "I'm in the army," he stuttered. "So am I," she mumbled, waving her tambourine. He had been experiencing flashbacks and was diagnosed as suffering with PTSD. Alan spent a long leave receiving treatment. During this time, he met Alice's family, proposed marriage, and was accepted. The pair were wed in October and set up home in rented accommodation on the island. Soon, Alice was expecting their first child. As part of his treatment, he had been advised to get back in the air, first in an aircraft. He was contacted by the Hampshire Constabulary, who were looking for pilots who could undertake surveillance missions over streets busy with revellers at night. A new aircraft was to be tested. The Edgeley Optica was powered by a ducted fan engine. Its fully glazed nose was like that of a helicopter. The machine could act as an aerial observation post and was equipped with infrared cameras and a powerful searchlight. Alan and a colleague flew undetected over Newport, Ryde and Shanklin during the pre-Christmas period, linked by radio to police on the ground. Sensitive microphones on the craft picked up festive music and groups of carol singers. They flew silently above the town, then moved over an industrial estate, and were astonished to view a group of men hurriedly bundling TVs, printers and PCs into a white van. The searchlight lit up the scene, and a loudspeaker boomed out, "Stop where you are and lay on the ground." The crooks were so astonished that they meekly surrendered to the officers on the ground. Alan was pleased to have proved the system and spent a lovely time with family and friends. Church bells rang out to welcome them to the Minster for a service of 9 lessons and carols. Children caroused in delight on finding a layer of snow which dampened their footfall after the service. Fully recovered from his injuries, he returned to his unit. They were tasked to carry out surveillance missions against rebels in an African state. Alan's equipment consisted of a blacked-out hang glider with him suspended below. He was able to take advantage of the steady wind which blew towards the cliffs and could fly back and forth alongside them for long periods. They were to seek and destroy 2 groups who were sheltering outside their cave homes one moonless night. The rebels were gathered round a fire on a plateau outside the cave eating a meal when Alan and his colleagues struck. Silently gliding towards the scene, they launched a series of phosphor grenades into the caves. The insurgents fled down trails into the jungle, but were captured by local ground forces. The brightly lit scene reminded Alan of fireworks night and Christmas lights. After his tour of service, he returned to his home, but was soon approached by the commander of the local Coast Guard unit. The man knew of Alan's special skills and asked him to help with a problem that was becoming increasingly serious: drug trafficking. It appeared that a group of well-organized smugglers were planning to take advantage of the festive season to land a haul of contraband somewhere along Sandown Bay. These operations had been observed on moonless nights when confusion was caused by a few gaily lit private boats which cruised offshore, adding to the illuminated spectacle on the land. Alan accepted the task and requested that his special hang glider be made available to the Coast Guard. The request was eventually, and rather grudgingly, approved, and a secret special base was set up on the cliff at Lake. Extra equipment in the form of a throat mic, infrared scanner were added. The first night with no moon was perfect for a test flight. Alan launched himself off the cliff and was able to stay aloft for a couple of hours as he flew silently and undetectable down to Luckham Headland and back. It was December the 23rd, and he was amazed at the sight and sounds made by revellers on the esplanade, in the streets, and he could even hear carolers as they stood in the cold awaiting some remuneration. "O little town of Bethlehem" could easily be heard. The next night was also moonless, and he received a message from the Coast Guard that a ship had moored 1 mile out to sea opposite Shanklin. It was only displaying small navigation lights. Shortly after midnight, Alan was launched from Lake Cliffs and was able to fly noiselessly down the coastline to the south. He was kept in constant radio touch with a controller. At about 2:30 a.m, he was warned that 2 small inflatables had been launched from the moored ship. Time for action. Alan ghosted down towards Shanklin Chine, at the bottom of which stood the appropriately named thatch-roofed Smuggler's Inn. He turned on his infrared detector and soon picked out 2 objects speeding towards the shore. He quietly raised the alarm and noted with pleasure that Coast Guard and police units were stationed in the inn, in nearby beach huts, and on the cliff top. Alan hovered over the intruders as they beached the dinghies, then pressed a switch which operated the spotlight to illuminate the scene. The crooks were quickly rounded up and arrested. The drug haul was of high-quality cocaine. In a parallel operation, officers on a Coast Guard cutter detained the mothership before he could escape. Alan found that the wind had picked up and become more turbulent, so he headed for a landing point on the Shanklin cliff top. Alan was tired and cold. He peered ahead and spied a ghostly image. The sound of jingle bells filled the air. He made out the shape of a sleigh loaded with gifts on which sat a white-bearded man in a red coat. It was apparently drawn by a reindeer. Can it be true? Was it really Santa? Suddenly, a gust caught his fragile craft, which collided with the tower of the cliff lift and was sent spinning down into the car park. For Alan, the lights had gone out. The off-duty policeman with his pony and sleigh was shocked by the dark apparition which had swept in, but he made a call for help. Alan had been protected by his helmet and the padded bag round his body. Rescue was soon at hand, and he was carefully released, placed on a special stretcher, and conveyed by ambulance to St. Mary's Hospital. He had not suffered any major injury, but remained unconscious until midday on December the 25th. He opened his eyes, saw his wife and children gathered by his bed. A choir had entered the ward and was singing "Hark the Herald Angels." "What's that noise?" he asked. "It's the sound of Christmas," came the happy reply. Thus ended the final surveillance task for Alan. Back home he found a message from the army. He was to be pensioned off, as his tasks were to be replaced by a drone.